The rain poured down in sheets as the car pulled up to the wrought iron gates of Willowbrook Manor. The asylum loomed in the distance, its Gothic architecture casting long, ominous shadows across the overgrown grounds. The gates creaked open with a groan, as if the very metal resisted their entry. The car's headlights flickered, illuminating the path ahead, but the darkness seemed to swallow the light whole. Dr. Evelyn Carter, a historian specializing in abandoned medical facilities, stepped out of the car, her breath visible in the cold night air. She had been researching Willowbrook for years, and now finally, she was here. The stories of unethical experiments, patient abuse, and unexplained deaths had drawn her in like a moth to a flame. She was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Her assistant, Mark, joined her, his face pale as he stared up at the imposing structure. "Are you sure about this, Dr. Carter? This place gives me the creeps." Evelyn nodded, her determination unwavering. "We have to do this, Mark. The secrets of Willowbrook need to be brought to light. Let's go." As they approached the main entrance, the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the faint sound of whispers. The door to the asylum stood slightly ajar, as if inviting them in. Evelyn pushed it open, the hinges screeching in protest. The air inside was thick with the scent of decay and something else, something metallic, like blood. The hallway stretched before them, lined with broken chairs and overturned gurneys. The walls were covered in peeling paint, and the floor was littered with debris. The only light came from their flashlights, which cast eerie shadows on the walls. As they moved deeper into the asylum, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Evelyn and Mark made their way to the old patient records room, where they hoped to find some clue about the experiments that had taken place. The room was filled with rows of dusty filing cabinets, their drawers half open, spilling out yellowed papers and photographs. The air was thick with the smell of mildew, and the floor creaked with every step. As Evelyn sifted through the documents, she found herself drawn to a particular file. It was labeled Project Lazarus, and the contents sent a chill down her spine. The file detailed a series of experiments aimed at reviving the dead, using a combination of electricity and unknown chemicals. The results were horrifying. Patients who had been declared dead were brought back to life, but they were no longer human. They were something else, something monstrous. Mark, who had been searching through another cabinet, suddenly froze. "Dr. Carter, do you hear that?" Evelyn listened, and then she heard it too, a low, guttural growl, coming from the shadows. The sound sent a wave of terror through her, but she forced herself to remain calm. "It's probably just the wind," she said, though she didn't believe it herself. The growl grew louder, and then they saw it, a shadowy figure, hunched over and moving unnaturally, as if its limbs didn't quite work right. It stepped into the light, revealing a face that was both human and not. Its eyes were empty, soulless, and its mouth was twisted into a grotesque grin. Evelyn and Mark backed away, their flashlights trembling in their hands. The creature let out a blood-curdling scream and lunged at them. They turned and ran, the sound of its footsteps close behind. Evelyn and Mark burst into what appeared to be an old operating theatre. The room was large, with a high ceiling and rows of rusted surgical tools lining the walls. In the center of the room was an operating table, stained with dark, dried blood. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and decay. They slammed the door shut behind them, but they knew it wouldn't hold the creature for long. Evelyn's mind raced as she tried to think of a way out. "There has to be another exit," she said, scanning the room. Mark pointed to a door on the far side of the room, over there. They ran to the door, but as they reached it, the lights flickered on, casting the room in a harsh, fluorescent glow. The operating table was no longer empty, it was occupied by a figure, strapped down and writhing in pain. The figure's face was obscured by a surgical mask, but its eyes were wide with terror. Evelyn recognized the figure from the photographs. In the file it was one of the patients who had been subjected to the Lazarus experiments. The patient's body was twisted and deformed, with patches of skin missing, revealing raw, red muscle underneath. The door behind them burst open, and the creature from the records room entered, its grotesque grin wider than ever. Evelyn and Mark were trapped, with no way out. Evelyn's mind raced as she tried to think of a way out. She noticed a large, heavy surgical saw on the wall and grabbed it, wielding it like a weapon. "Stay back," she shouted at the creature, though she knew it was futile. The creature lunged at her, but Evelyn swung the saw with all her might, catching it in the side. The creature let out a scream of pain and staggered back, giving them a brief moment to act. "Mark, help me," Evelyn shouted, and together they pushed the operating table towards the creature, using it as a barrier. The creature snarled and clawed at the table, but it was enough to buy them some time. They ran to the door on the far side of the room and burst through it, finding themselves in a narrow hallway. The hallway was lined with doors, each one marked with a number. Evelyn didn't have time to think, she just ran, with Mark close behind. The creature was still pursuing them, its footsteps echoing through the hallway. Evelyn and Mark turned a corner and found themselves in a stairway. They descended the stairs as quickly as they could, the sound of the creature's growls growing fainter with each step. Finally, they reached the ground floor and burst out into the night air. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still wet, and the air was cold. They didn't stop running until they reached the car, their hearts pounding in their chests. As they drove away from Willowbrook Manor, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't escaped, not really. The secrets of the asylum were still buried within its walls, and she knew that one day she would have to return. Back in her office, Evelyn pored over the documents she had managed to salvage from Willowbrook Manor. The file on Project Lazarus was the most disturbing, but there were other files on patients who had been subjected to electroshock therapy, lobotomies, and other horrific experiments. As she read through the documents, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The shadows in the room seemed to move on their own, and the air was thick with an oppressive silence. Then, she heard it, a faint whisper, coming from the corner of the room. She turned, her heart pounding, but there was nothing there. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, until it was a voice, clear and distinct. "You can't escape us, Dr. Carter, we are always here." Evelyn's blood ran cold as she realized the truth. The spirits of Willowbrook Manor had followed her home. They would never let her go, not until she uncovered the full extent of the horrors that had taken place within its walls. And so, with a heavy heart, Evelyn began to plan her return to the asylum. She knew that the next time she entered Willowbrook Manor, she might not come back.